Every night, as dusk painted the city in shades of orange and gray, the silent figure rolled into position. Slouched in an old, rusted wheelchair, his legs twisted awkwardly under faded blankets, he settled at his usual corner, where the pavement met the alley beside Madame Sika's brothel. The wheelchair creaked each time he adjusted himself, his face blank, eyes unfocused. A tattered bowl sat by his footrest, catching the occasional pity coin from passers-by. But he never asked, never begged. They said he was deaf and mute. Some thought he was mentally disturbed. A few said he'd been cursed by a woman of the night, a fate sealed in silence. But none knew his real name. None knew he could walk. None knew that his ears worked just fine. He was Detective Keith, once the most feared name in the city's criminal underworld investigations. Until the case that broke him. 4 years earlier, Keith had been the lead investigator on Operation Snakefang, a covert mission to dismantle a human trafficking syndicate that lured young girls from the villages with promises of jobs and education, only to trap them in brothels across the city. He had been close, too close. A midnight raid had gone wrong. His cover was blown. 2 officers died, and Agnes, the young informant he had promised to protect, vanished. No body, no clue, just a single shoe left behind in a pool of blood. Keith took the fall. Demoted, disgraced, and drinking himself into oblivion, he disappeared from public life. But behind the scenes, his mind still worked. He knew that the brothels were connected. He knew that the whispers of a man called the Bishop, a ghost-like kingpin pulling strings from the shadows, were not just stories. And so, he became what the streets would ignore. For over a year he watched. The girls came and went. The ones who stayed too long developed hollow eyes. The ones who tried to escape disappeared. Sometimes, men in black SUVs came to speak to Madame Sika, always late at night, always with briefcases. Keith learned to read lips, to track conversations through body language, and most importantly, to listen when they thought he couldn't. Drunken clients bragged about dark dealings. Girls cried over missing friends. One night, he overheard a man whisper to a woman, "Tonight, they're moving the shipment. 10 girls, drugged and blindfolded. The port, midnight." Keith's heart nearly gave out. He hadn't felt adrenaline in months. This was it. But he had no badge, no backup, just a recorder hidden inside his rusted wheelchair. The turning point came in the form of a skinny, sharp-eyed girl who always wore one red shoe. Her name was Tari. She worked at a different brothel down the alley, but often passed by Madame Sika's place. She was bold, always chewing gum, and never looked afraid. One night, when a drunken man hit her in the alley and she fought him off, Keith had to break character for the first time in months. He wheeled forward and made a noise. Just a grunt. The man, startled, ran. Tari looked at him. "So you can make sound?" She stared harder. "You're not mad, are you?" From that night, she sat beside him when she had nothing else to do. Told him about the other girls. About a friend named Camilla, who disappeared after being visited by a man in an ivory suit. A man everyone called Father. The Bishop. Keith began to trust her. And one night, he passed her a note. "I'm not deaf. I'm not mute. I'm not crippled. I'm here to stop them. Will you help me?" Tari stared at him, trembling, then nodded. With Tari's help, Keith started mapping out the network. The traffickers weren't just brothel owners. They were politicians, pastors, even policemen. Tari brought him stolen phones, SIM cards, and even a USB drive once, hidden in a lipstick case. It had photos, girls in cages, blindfolded and drugged, each tagged with numbers. Keith's blood boiled. He contacted his former handler, DSP Michael, who hadn't spoken to him since the demotion. But when Michael saw the files, he uttered only 3 words. "We go tonight." Keith returned to his wheelchair as bait. He needed one last recording, one last confirmation of the location where the girls were kept before being shipped out. Tari had told him they used an abandoned warehouse near the Navy dockyard. But that wasn't enough. He needed a voice, a face. That night, a black SUV pulled up again. The man in the ivory suit stepped out. The bishop. Tall, charismatic, with a gold wristwatch and a Bible tucked under his arm, like a joke. He whispered to Madame Sika, "5 new ones tonight. The foreign buyer lands tomorrow." Keith recorded everything, but just as the bishop turned to go, he stopped, looked at Keith. "Has this one been checked?" he asked. Madame Sika scoffed. "He's just our furniture." The bishop walked up, bent down. Keith held his breath. Then he whispered, right into Keith's ear, "I know you're listening," and walked away. That encounter troubled Keith a lot, but he stayed put, checked out his surroundings, and made sure to slip away when no one was watching. Much later that night, he made an effort to return the next day, and for the rest of the month, without making it look obvious that what the bishop accused him of was true. The ambush at the dock was meant to be swift and final. It was a culmination of weeks of planning, late-night stakeouts, and whispered intelligence. But from the moment the police vans rolled into position, Keith felt something was off. The silence was too clean. The dock, too empty. The warehouse, too still. As DSP Michael signaled the team to advance, a faint beep echoed from inside the structure. A second later, hell broke loose. The entire warehouse erupted into a fireball. The force of the explosion sent flaming debris skyward, lighting the night like a volcanic eruption. The ground trembled. Windows shattered several blocks away. 5 officers, including 2 of Keith's closest fieldmen, were instantly incinerated. Those who survived barely crawled away with shredded uniforms and scorched skin. There were no girls, no traffickers, just death. Keith watched from a distance, his body frozen in a mix of horror and fury. His phone rang. DSP Michael's voice was frantic, hoarse. "They knew!" Someone tipped them off. Keith didn't speak. He didn't need to. His mind raced, heart pounding. There was only one person he had confided in about the final plan. Tari. He waited all night. The street lamp flickered above his station near the old brothel, casting long shadows on the wet pavement. Every figure that passed made his breath hitch. Every footstep tightened his chest. But Tari never came. At dawn, the call came. Her body was found floating in the canal beneath Old Market Bridge. Her bare feet scraped raw, her one red shoe, her signature, tied tightly around her neck like a grotesque necklace. It wasn't just murder. It was a message. Keith wept for the first time in years. Alone. Silently. Rage tearing through him like fire. Tari had been more than an informant. She had been a spark of humanity in a world he had long condemned. The coroner handed him her bloodied jacket, folded neatly. Inside, sewn into the inner lining with trembling hands, was a small piece of paper, a handwritten note, "Warehouse at Ibis Yard, Tuesday, midnight. They keep the rest there. I'm sorry." She had tried to make it right, tried to warn them. Even in death, Tari had chosen justice. Keith knew the system had failed. He couldn't trust the command, couldn't trust the radios, couldn't trust the law. So he went underground. He called in every debt owed from the darkest corners of the city. Men he had once arrested, beaten, chased through alleys, now became his allies. Ex-convicts with vendettas, rival pimps who had lost sisters, former soldiers haunted by what they'd seen, angry fathers whose daughters had vanished into the night. They came together with blood in their eyes and war in their hearts. On Tuesday night, rain fell in torrents. Lightning crackled over the ocean. The dock at Ibis Yard was silent, but the silence was deceptive. Keith and his rogue squad moved like ghosts, breaching the warehouse from 3 points. Inside, chaos erupted. Gunfire rang out, muffled by thunder. Crates exploded. Metal clanged. Screams sliced the night air. A fire ignited near the generator, spreading quickly. The yard became a war zone, but they pushed through. When it was over, 22 girls were rescued from locked containers and underground holding rooms. Some had been trafficked across borders. Some were barely 12. The traffickers fought hard, but not hard enough. Blood soaked the floors. Several of Keith's men fell, but they refused to retreat. And the bishop? The man who had orchestrated it all with a preacher's tongue and a monster's heart? He tried to flee by speedboat, engine roaring through the surf. But as he approached open water, Keith stood on the dock, soaked in blood and rain, his rifle aimed with deadly calm. He fired once. The bishop collapsed into the boat, the engine sputtering to silence. Justice had found him. A week later, the city woke to headlines that shook its soul. Mysterious street beggar exposes citywide sex trafficking ring. News stations played pixelated surveillance clips of the man in the wheelchair rolling past crime scenes, unnoticed, unseen. Audio clips surfaced, voices of politicians, traffickers, even police captains, recorded by a man they thought was deaf and mute. The scandal exploded. Protests erupted in front of government buildings. International watchdogs descended. Within days, dozens of high-ranking officials were suspended. Within weeks, the arrests began. Politicians, judges, police chiefs, and businessmen, each with links to the trafficking ring, were dragged into courtrooms in chains. Their offshore accounts were frozen, properties seized, names permanently stained. The trials became a national reckoning, and though many tried to spin stories, plead ignorance, or bribe their way out, the evidence, the recordings, the testimonies, the whispers Keith had gathered over years, spoke louder than lies. But Keith was nowhere to be found. DSP Michael, moved beyond words by what Keith had done, pushed for full reinstatement. He submitted a recommendation for Keith to be promoted. Commander of Intelligence, national honors, full pension, all accolades he had long been denied. But Keith declined. "I've fought my war," he told Michael, the only friend he had left in the system. "Let others hold the flags now." After the story broke, he retreated to a modest home in the suburbs, a quiet house behind rusting gates, shaded by an old mango tree. Neighbors thought he was just a quiet middle-aged man. He kept to himself, tended a small garden, fed stray cats, spent long evenings watching the sunset from his porch, an old radio playing distant jazz. He didn't want recognition. He had seen enough of the world's rot to know glory was fleeting. But the girls never forgot. Some now work with NGOs. Others rebuilt their lives across continents. Yet they all remember the silent man who sat outside Madame Sika's brothel and listened, not just to their stories, but to their pain. They called him the Watcher, the Invisible Guardian, the Wheelchair Witness. And every year, on the anniversary of the Ibis Yard rescue, someone leaves a single red shoe at the now-closed brothel's doorstep, in memory of Tari, in honor of the man who heard everything and chose to act.